is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network. Welcome to the Political Review for this week. It is the 30th of July, 2023. And what that first half of the year is officially gone. And we are rounding the corner till we are kind of staring down the barrel of 2024. So if you ain't got a good head start on what you plan to do with 2020, your wife starting to get a little bit sourish. So you better get on the stick and get working, because time is passing, and as we know, time and tide wait for no man. It's been a heck of a week here. Well, I could almost say a hell of a week because of how hard it's been, but it has been an interesting week here in the 242, the passing of Aris Monker and others in the community, the inimitable Paul Farquharson, former commissioner of police, Helen Ferguson, I guess you would call her great cousin. Condolences to her family. I was at the funeral this afternoon. It just makes it makes you aware of how precious each moment is, and it's one of the reasons that I do say on a weekly basis to take it seriously and to recognize the preciousness of every moment. And it may get repetitive, and I'm not sorry about that. That is, I've taken it as a part of my responsibility. So, time is passing, and I urge you to do the right thing with it. Today is another an interesting day for me because while the show theoretically is an explication of our local politics, an exploration of how we do politics and governance in the country, today we're going to step away from directly discussing national politics and take a look at sort of the geopolitics of our region, especially given a recent comment that sort of sparked the reason for my interest in having the conversation today. I heard a comment by a senior U.S. official that talked about China being, quote unquote, in the red zone of the U.S.'s homeland through its serious engagement in the region. And one of the obvious names that was called as part of this commentary, as part of this report, was the Bahamas, and so I just happened to have had a pleasant surprise. A friend of mine invited me to the Bahamas China Friendship Association's event Thursday past, and had a great time. And it was a great opportunity to reconnect with some friends that I hadn't seen for a while, and to renew some relations. I'm always grateful for, and it put me in mind of this conversation again. And I mean, when you think about it, you look at China's influence in the Caribbean. The reality is that China is a member of both the Inter-American Development Bank and the Caribbean Development Bank. And China is an observer at the Organization of American States, which is the multilateral group. It's kind of like the United Nations, but for the Western Hemisphere. And alongside Italy and Germany, China is the third largest shareholder in the Caribbean Development Bank, with about 5.6% of the overall shares, which is exponentially higher than the majority of Caribbean countries. So China is clearly significantly invested in the region. And today, to talk about it, I'm joined by Dr. Donovan Moxey, who is the president of the Bahamas China Friendship Association. That association was formed in 2004 with a goal of promoting and economic opportunities between the peoples of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and the People's Republic of China. And the specific core objectives of the association include to promote, foster, and encourage good relationships, goodwill, and people-to-people contact between the people of the Bahamas and the people of China, and afford them the means of and opportunity for social intercourse, mutual helpfulness and assistance, moral improvement, friendly collaboration, and rational recreation, to promote relief and assistance to the people of the Bahamas in any way whatsoever, and especially in cases of emergency, and likewise, to make donations to the people of China from time to time in respect of relief or social enhancement, and a couple of other very important specific objectives, one of which includes the promotion of economic and trade opportunities through entrepreneurial development and participation in trade fairs and investment tours, which I think we're going to get to talk a little bit about today. So that's the Bahamas China Friendship Association. And Dr. Moxey, political review before, but it's been a while. So welcome back to the political review, Dr. Donovan Moxey.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Parker. Good afternoon, Bahamas. Certainly great to be here in a different context. Last time I was on a political review was in a separate context, but now it's with a new hat that I'm wearing, and that is as president of the Bahamas China Friendship Association. Our new slate of officers was just elected in February of this year, and so what we're doing now is very, very focused strategy in essentially relaunching the organization and doing whatever we can to fulfill the objectives and mandates of the founders of the organization back in 2004.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dr. Moxey, there is a thread of conversation in our national debate in the Bahamas. It gets a little close to xenophobia from time to time. Right. Especially when there seems to be this view that is really intractable and also kind of maybe unsupported by any facts, but it doesn't seem to be something that you can just beat down. But there is this view that China is trying to take over. I'm not sure take over what or how or why, but that is a view that I continue to hear expressed in the national discussion.
Understood.
So what I would like to establish first and foremost is, what is the value, in your view, of having good relations between the Bahamas and China? And I want to be as cold-blooded as possible and as far away from kumbaya as we can.
Right.
Yeah.
Understood. So let me begin first of all by saying that the Bahamas China Friendship Association, and I'll just abbreviate it as BCFA. First of all, we are not a political organization. That's number one. And so the first thing is that we don't get involved whenever China has a political issue with another country. Our organization, we don't get involved in making comments that are political in nature. So what I want to do is make sure that everybody understands that I'm not going to get deep involved in the geopolitical discussion as a representative of the Bahamas China Friendship Association. My opinions is Donovan Moxie, the Bahamian citizen, and what I see and what I've been seeing in the world and what have you. So that's really the context of where I'm going to speak. The other context of where I'm going to speak is really related to the founding of the organization. So let me sort of talk about how that came about and really what the goal of that organization is. I know you read some of the objectives, but let me talk about some other things as well. So what everybody should know and understand is that the Bahamas formed diplomatic relations with China officially in 1997. And when the Bahamas did this, the Bahamas adopted what's called the One Nation policy, where the Bahamas recognized China as being the single nation that it deals with when it comes to dealing with China government to government. And anybody else under the One Nation policy, China doesn't, the Bahamas doesn't deal with on that political level. The other thing, too, to keep in mind is that the U.S. views China the same way in their diplomatic relations. They all have a one nation policy with China, but obviously they do other things with respect to Taiwan for various reasons, which, we don't necessarily want to get into all the political details, but for various reasons, they have certain position as they take toward Taiwan. So now going back to the Bahamas, so when we formed diplomatic relations in 1997, obviously, as a government, you now have to build a relationship with that country that you're now forming those diplomatic relations with. And so obviously there's one level you do it is through diplomacy at the political level, which means that you provide ambassadors on both sides. You talk about things that are of mutual interest on a high level from both a political and a trade perspective as well. Because the reality is the Bahamas has a single vote in the UN and all of the various committees that are in the UN. And so does China and every other country in the world. No country has double votes. Now, you may not be a part of the Security Council or certain elements of the UN, but again, when it comes to the General Assembly, just like anybody else. And so those things on a political level can work with. The second thing that you want to do when you form diplomatic relations is you want to talk about how do you now strengthen the cultural and economic ties between the two nations. And so one of the ways you do that is through the Bahamas China Friendship Association. Now, what the audience should also recognize is that China, when it talks about diplomacy, when it talks about spreading China culture or building relationships, China has an organization called the Association of Friendship Associations, is what China. So China has this organization in Beijing that's responsible for managing all the friendship associations around the world. So what the audience should recognize is that the Bahamas China Friendship Association is not unique, in that we have similar organizations in Jamaica, Barbados, Cayman, Latin America, even the United States of America. There are friendship associations all over the world, Vanuatu, you name it. Because I had a conference in China back about 5 years ago where we had all of the island nations come together. So the Bahamas China, this Bahamas China Friendship Association is not unique. And so again, we're formed to do those kinds of connections. Now, going back to what you talk about, the xenophobia, what everybody needs to recognize and understand is that we're part of a global arena. And so if you're looking to grow a country, and people grow their countries in two ways, by trade and population growth. That's just what it is. There's no other way you grow a country, right? So the population growth is organic, or you grow by immigrants coming in, and you grow your economic power by the trading that you do. Because if you trade within yourself, you never get any bigger. You just simply cycling money around. And so one of the things that people need to understand is China is a growing superpower. And so if you, the Bahamas, saying that you want to grow economically, you have to partner with those persons that are growing as well. The U.S. has been our number one trading partner since we knew ourselves. China is emerging as a world power, and China is essentially looking at the Caribbean strategically in terms of how it grows its trade and its influence. And so the Bahamas is a part of that. So the reality is that we're not going to be bypassed as someone that China, the U.S., or any country that's growing in the world wants to establish relationships with. So the reality is that we have to recognize that as Bahamians, and we have to say, okay, great. So now what do we do as a country to make sure that we maximize benefits for us when you look at these relationships that are emerging? And I think the Bahamas-China Friendship Association has a role to play, politics has a role to play, the business communities have a role to play, and the people of the Bahamas have a role to play. And all I'm trying to do is make sure that we play our role as the Friendship Association.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you point out that there are different roles to be played here. Can I ask you to elaborate? You say that people have a role to play. What is the role of both the Bahamas China Friendship Association, and also when you say that people have a role to play, what is that role in your imagination? What do you
Great question. So when you look at the Bahamas China Friendship Association, our role is really strengthening cultural and economic ties between the two nations. And so how do you do that? And so first, as we go to our website, bcfa242.org, you'll see that we have certain initiatives that we have undertaken as an organization to fulfill these core objectives of strengthening cultural and economic ties. And so as an association, we see exposure to the Chinese language in both formal and informal learning is important, which is why we have the Sip and Paint calligraphy event that you attended. Some of our members now are talking about Chinese language classes, culture. And so you want to demystify certain things that language barrier, and you want to try find ways to essentially introduce people to the language. And so we're not giving full-blown language classes, but we're essentially making that introduction. Hence what you did Thursday, or week after last Thursday, with our Sip and Paint, where essentially what we did is we took Bahamian phrases and colloquialisms. We then converted it to Mandarin, both in writing as well as what we call phonetically. And then persons were able to make that connection between Bahamian vernacular idioms and phrases with what it looks like and sounds like in Mandarin. So again, it was a fun activity. It was one of introducing that. The association also played a role in the formation way back when of the Confucius Institute at UB that was teaching Chinese language there as well. And so that's how we're exposing on that way from a cultural standpoint. The other thing we do is expose culturally through Chinese kites. Chinese kites are very famous. And so we have a kite flying event that we did some years ago, and we're looking to introduce again this year. And we want to do that among young people. You know, I grew up making and flying kites with newspapers when I was very young. And so now what we want to do is essentially add a twist to that and expose young people to Chinese kites, various intricate designs, and how to fly them. Some of these can be very complex to do. Again, introduction to China, introductions to Chinese culture. Same thing with ping pong. Even though ping pong was not formed in China, I believe it was created by a British man, but the Asian culture made that extremely important, where they've essentially been dominating the sport for years. And again, it's something that they consider to be the number one pastime. We're essentially reintroducing and getting Bahamians involved in that. Now, with the trade opportunities, we have a trade mission that we are launching and we're going to be doing to Yiwu, China in October, which we'll get into some of the details of that later. But again, that's the connection there. So the association, so many of our members study in China. There's scholarships that are available through the Chinese government. And what we're doing is we're trying to help students who are interested, help facilitate them becoming a part of that as well. So that's the organization there. When you talk about the individuals now, here's where it becomes important. So one of the things that we know that our government has been trying to do and working on is increasing Chinese tourists, the number of Chinese tourists that come to the Bahamas and enjoy themselves and spend money. As we all know, we've seen the economic numbers. I think China is producing more millionaires on an annual basis than anyone else. I don't think they've caught up with the United States yet, but they're growing. And one day they may surpass the U.S. in terms of number of millionaires. Well, people who have that kind of wealth, they want to spend that money. They want to come somewhere, some places that they've never seen before. And they want to travel just like Bahamians travel. And so one of the things that's important to us, and you use the word xenophobia, is to not adopt a mindset of somebody's coming to take over. So if somebody's coming to visit, you treat them with the same level of respect and kindness as any other guest that comes to the country, and don't view them as being here to take something over. And when I talk about the role to play as a population, let's just be the same welcoming persons that we've always been. Don't try to vilify somebody based on what you would hear or based on assuming or based on what may be going on globally, because that person may have nothing to do with it. Who knows? That person may have the same view as you. And so it's all about, as individuals, treating everybody with respect. And if they're a guest in the country coming as a visitor, then you treat them as such with the level of respect and welcoming that they certainly deserve.
Apparently, there's a thing that happens on these shows every now and again, Dr. Moxie, where we have to take a break.
Okay.
This is annoying because we're just getting on a roll. I'm going to be obedient to my producer and take our break right now. And we're talking with Dr. Donovan Moxie of the Bahamas-China Friendship Association. And there's a trade mission, I believe, coming up that I want to talk about as well, which we'll get to on the other side of the break. So make sure that you stay tuned. We'll be right back just after this message.
We're gonna give you a check every week for a year. Percy's Pension Plan. Island Game, keep you winning. Percy's Pension Plan. Dream big, we will help you live it. Percy's Pension Plan. Island Game, we got you. Percy's Pension Plan. From the friends you can trust. If winning is a must, come play the game you know, cause your best chance is with us. The most trustworthy name is Percy's Island Game. So put 20 on your account and ride this easy train at Percy's Island Game.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Parents, it's that sweet time of year again.
What are you talking about? It ain't Christmas yet.
The kids are going back to school, so pick up your copy of the Nassau Guardian's Back to School Supplement, cause
it's the most wonderful time of the year.
Put your students in the latest styles at the lowest prices, because summer break is almost over, and our Back to School Supplement is filled with brand name back to school supplies at discounted prices, store locations, hours, and contact details.
It's the happiest season of all.
Advertisers, call the Nassau Guardian today at 302-2300. 2-for-1 insertion deal. If it's uniforms, shoes, books, backpacks, calculators, art supplies, laptops, tablets, or whatever is on your back-to-school supply list, your ad should be in the Nassau Guardian's Back to School Supplement.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
All right, folks, and welcome back to the Political Review. You are tuned in 96.9 FM. My name is Quincy Parker. I'm your host, and my guest is Dr. Donovan Moxie, president of the Bahamas-China Friendship Association, having been elected to that position in February of this year. The guests at the paint and sip thing they represented a pretty broad cross section of society, Dr. Moxie. I hope she won't mind me saying so, but the Charge d'Affaires, Chapitz, was there, and some other folks from the diplomatic corps, as well as people from the broad spectrum of the commercial and industrial community. So it sort of tells you that there is a very valuable relationship there that needs to be nurtured in the minds of a great many people. I won't necessarily I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to ask you what do you think the Bahamas as a country gets from such close ties with China? I don't necessarily mean, I mean, obviously $350 million in investments, plus, you know, the billions in respect of Bahama and the Hutchison port and whatnot.
Right.
But in terms of, let's take that out of the equation. What do we get, in your view, from closer ties with China?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, honestly, when you look at the connection that we have with China, you cannot discount the economic connection. Obviously, when you look at the Chinese Exim Bank, when you look at CCA America, when you look at Bahama, the port, Chinese investors have made foreign direct investments in the Bahamas. Now, they are nowhere near the tens of billions of dollars that American investors have put into the Bahamas. They're nowhere near that. And so it's one of those things where everybody has to recognize. I think this is extremely important. It sort of gets into, you know, my view of geopolitics, things of that nature. But my position on it is this: is I view my country, the Bahamas, as sort of the Switzerland. And so from our perspective, recognizing historically that we are a nation driven by tourism, guests that come here, spend money. So we can't afford to vilify anybody who wants to come and visit this country, because we're used to welcoming people from all over the world. Now, obviously, if there's individuals or there are countries that intentionally want to do harm to Bahamas or Bahamians, we need to protect ourselves and protect our borders. Or there are people who want to essentially come in and misutilize our resources, we have to protect our borders. I mean, that has to happen that way. But when you look at people who genuinely want to come here as visitors, who are making foreign direct investments in the country, then you have to recognize that there are a lot of things that come with that. And so the reality is this, and this is, I mean, you can look at this in history all they want, is that whenever you have a country whose investors make a significant investment in another country, now that country has interest in that country. And one of the role of governments that governments play for their citizens who make investments abroad is to make sure that they're positioned to, and I'll just use this word, protect their interest or look out for their interest. Mm-hmm. So whenever you have somebody make a bill, think about it this way. Let's say you are a Bahamian billionaire and you make $1 billion investment in Jamaica. And I'll just throw out Jamaica there, okay? It would not make sense for you or anybody else, or let's say Bahamians had $10 billion in Jamaica. If the Bahamian government had no formal relationship or ties or connections to Jamaica whatsoever, you as that investor who has no standing in that country, you're putting that investment at significant risk because of things that happen politically or economically, right? Whatever. You would want, if it ever rises to the level, at the political level, you would want to make sure that there's representation there for you, investment. The same thing too happens also if you're a country, and I'm just thinking on a broad geopolitical trading perspective. You grow your economy as a country based on your tax base. So if you have your citizens making investments abroad, and you know that inevitably those profits are going to end up back into your country or tax or whatever it is, as a government, it is incumbent upon you to make sure that you have the appropriate relationships there to make sure that you're looking out for your investors. Countries do it all the time. You hear them say, and I'm going to mention, people say it all the time, hey, listen, we have to protect blah, blah, blah interest abroad. Or this is a threat to our interest abroad. So those things happen all the time. So when you have significant investments made by a country in any country, there's always a role for governments to play at a political level to ensure that interests are protected. You see? Mm-hmm. And so that's something that people have to look at that level. It's not a situation where somebody's coming in and saying they're taking over. It's a way that's saying that I'm protecting the interest of my citizens abroad, and hence to protecting the interest of the country abroad. Now, you as a country, you don't have to subscribe to that particular country's political views, if you will. And we talk about this on various levels for other countries too as well, where people say, hey, yeah, you come to my country, we work together, but don't bring your political views here of whatever it may be, communism or whatever people want to talk about, because we have our certain ways of doing things. And at the political level, things will happen the way they happen. But at a cultural and economic level, the citizens have a role to play as well. And that's where, again, our organization comes in and other similar organizations and even individuals come into play.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens in many cases, right, is that people look at the political rhetoric between the U.S. and China, and they try to place the Bahamas at the center of that discussion, which I think is the top two economies in the world with GDPs in the trillions of dollars. I don't know if we actually should be in that conversation, but we want to place ourselves there to have the conversation anyway. And they see the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment as significant representation of interest. But the reality is, when you consider the size of these economies, hundreds of millions of dollars is a rounding error at a low, at a firm, not even on the main street in China's financial district. You understand?
That is correct.
So you can't say the tens of millions, the hundreds of millions of dollars, even the billions of dollars is that's not a thing. So that's why I say we need to take it out of the conversation and talk about what we can get from them as a country. What is it that we are trying to achieve, right?
Right.
And then the other side of it, to me, is that we're always focused on what we can get.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I appreciate about the Bahamas-China Friendship Association, when reading through its strategic objectives, is that there is a mutuality to it, right? Mutual helpfulness and assistance,
right?
Friendly collaboration, right? The Bahamas, even in terms of where you're talking about promoting relief and assistance, it's turned around, and one of the strategic objectives is for the Bahamas to make donations to the people of China from time to time in respect of relief or social enhancement, right? So
that's correct.
There's a sense that we have something to give as much as we have something to get,
correct.
Which I think is often missing from the conversation about superpowers.
Correct.
So I wanted to make that statement and sort of give you an opportunity to respond to it.
Yeah, let me add some stuff to it. Going back to what you said earlier about even the attendees of the event. So one of the things, again, in our name is the word friendship. So what we did in putting on our event is obviously we made invitations to the Chinese ambassador, Ambassador Dai, and she graciously attended. We made invitations to the Charge d'Affaires pits and our staff. They attended, because our position is this: as an organization, we're not taking a political stand on anything. We're friendly, and we're promoting that. And everybody knows Bahamians are friendly people. That's how we've raised. I mean, we came up in a tourist environment and economy. And I remember when I was a kid growing up in our civics class, they talked about being nice and friendly and respectful to all visitors and guests. And so our position there was inviting those particular entities. We also extended invitations to I believe, other government diplomatic entities as well, because we wanted them there, because everything was done in a spirit of friendship and openness. And we certainly thank them for doing that, because that's exactly who we are. Now let's get to this whole idea of the geopolitical side. You're correct. When you look at the numbers around the Bahamas, the economic activity here in the Bahamas, and what we represent, it is a rounding error in terms of when you look at the size of the U.S. economies that are there. And so just like everything else, you have to kind of, in my mind, sort of understand the context of what you're looking at. And so just like any other country, regardless of what our economic impact is or isn't, the Bahamas is simply another piece on the chessboard. Okay. And so the question is, how is that piece viewed and how is that piece allocated from a geopolitical perspective? And obviously, the politicians have opinions on that. They have thoughts on that, and obviously, there are conversations that happens at different levels, all the time. And so, as the Bahamians and as Bahamians, our first thought should always be what's best for the Bahamas and Bahamians for our future, just like every other country considers that as well. And so, our position is we have no reason, as I can see, to be a staunch enemy of China. We have no reason, as I can see, to be a staunch enemy of the United States. And in my opinion, probably the only country that ever attacked us unprovoked was Cuba. And Bahamians hang out in Cuba all the time. So, and we don't have any broken relationships with Cuba. So our position is entirely, in my opinion, should always be, what do we do for the best interest of the country? How do we grow it forward? And we don't need to proactively become enemies of anybody until they show themselves otherwise. And that's sort of the position that I take personally. And obviously, as an or the geopolitical realm, and we stay out of it. I believe there's an African proverb that says, when two elephants fight, the mice and everybody else just get out the way. So we have no role to play, in my opinion, in whatever issues that may occur politically and geopolitically between the U.S. and China.
That said, when you look at what is available for, well, let me rephrase. I don't want to make it. I was going to put a value judgment on it just now, and I don't think that's appropriate. So let's ask instead. What is the association's ability to help Bahamian entrepreneurs crack either the Chinese market for export or the Chinese market for entrepreneurial education, which is an incredibly rich and diverse source, in my view?
Great. Listen, I'm glad you asked that question because that's the focus right now of our trade mission. And so there's just two answers to that. And I've been thinking about this as well, and we're trying to do what we can to facilitate this. So right now we have a planned trade mission to Yiwu, China. That's YIWU. And Yiwu is a province that's about a city that's about 2 hours train ride from Shanghai. And so this year, Yiwu has an international commodities fair that they have. And it is the largest international commodities fair in China that's focused on small and medium-sized enterprises. And that's, I'm going to say that, small and medium-sized enterprises. We've heard about the Canton Fair and some of these big fairs. And who tends to go there are these very, very large volume buyers. People when units, they're filling out containers in the multiples. And so if you are a large enterprise, you go to the Canton Fairs of the world, Canton Fairs in China. However, if you're a small mom and pop shop, and you only have the budget to order several hundreds of units of certain items and probably not enough to fill a container, then Yiwu is where you want to go. And we picked Yiwu specifically because this is the fair that's really catered toward that startup entrepreneur. So if you want to start a retail store or maybe build your own brand of some particular product, and maybe you start off with a volume of maybe a couple hundred or a few thousand units, this is the place to go. And so this fair is from October 21st to the 23rd. But right now, we're on the calendar to leave on the 19th and come back on the 28th of October. And the reason being is that we want to get there, get situated in time for the fair. And then after the fair on the 24th, we're also going to go to a place called Henan Province. And Henan Province is the province that's about, again, maybe 2-3 hours train ride away from Yiwu. And they really do a lot of the electronic factors and manufacturing is done there as well. And then we also want to take some time for culture. And so from an economic standpoint, we have an opportunity now to really allow young Bahamian entrepreneurs to go directly to the manufacturers and be able to order in quantities that their budget can sustain as a startup. So when you look at small and medium-sized enterprises, it's ideal for them. And so that's why we pick it the way we've done. We have a partnership with MSC, which I believe is the #1 or #2 global shipper in the world. And so we're organizing with them logistics that allow you to get your goods out of China and back in the Bahamas. if you will. And so it's going to be something that we'll have some seminars which will educate you on doing business in China, educate you on shipping and logistics and things of that nature. So it's catered to that small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think what a lot of our audience don't realize is that quite a number of retail businesses now in the Bahamas source a lot of their goods from Junkanoo groups. When they look at the Junkanoo tricks, the feathers, the quote-unquote bling is coming from Yiwu, China as well. So this is a significantly large commodities market. Now, flip side, the other way around, us trading with China. The bottom line is this, is that I don't see us having the manufacturing capacity in place to really trade with China on a goods and a manufacturing process at a high level. What I do see, however, is this, and Bahamians can be very smart and create niche markets. If you're talking about creating high-end, one-of-a-kind goods or goods with limited quantities that are handmade, highest quality, and I'm thinking, in my mind, these Bahamian bags, right, that are handmade by some of these brilliant artists, then there's a connection there for you in China to really tap into goods that are unique, different from any place else in the world that you can provide to them as well. And so I think there's a great opportunity for people who provide specialty goods in limited quantities, but at a very, very at premium pricing to go into China. I think there's another opportunity from the entertainment and cultural exchange perspective for Bahamians in China as well. When you look at our music and our entertainment, in fact, one of the hit songs in China was actually written and performed by a Bahamian who did extremely well. I mean, he was like a superstar in China. And so there's an opportunity there for Bahamians to spread Bahamian culture in that environment as well. You're talking about a country with almost 1.5 billion people, and you're talking about people who are looking at the world very differently because their level of access is different. And you can bring something that's unique and different to them from a cultural and entertainment perspective. I think that represents a huge opportunity for the high end. But there's no mass production of anything. I don't know if, obviously for us, probably the thing that we can export to them more than anything else is really going to be seafood. But again, we're not geared up for that yet as Bahamians to do that as well. But again, there'll be emerging opportunities. But like I said, my thought process is that the importation of goods by small and medium-sized enterprises directly from manufacturers, and these can be goods that are essentially branded for the local market because they have new Bahamian brands in them, as well as the export of very, very high-end specialized products, catering to the very wealthy Chinese who have the money to spend. I think there are opportunities on both sides there. And then obviously there's the entertainment component as well.
Yeah. The question about development of opportunities also comes to mind, right? You made an offhand remark about fisheries, and the fact is, the Bahamas' fisheries, the third largest in the West, the third richest in the Western Hemisphere, right? There must be to develop an export component of our fisheries market, especially when you consider the kind of fish that are in our oceans, and you line that up with what is on the high-end menus around the world. We are sitting on a potential gold mine in terms of just the what we could make from the fisheries, but nobody seems to be willing to invest in commercialization of that opportunity. Is that the kind of thing that that the association is even capable of helping with in terms of business development, maybe, or sectoral development?
Yeah, I understand exactly where you're coming from. And as a gentleman whose family is very connected to the sea, I know, I mean, in the Bahamas, probably the largest unexploited opportunity we have for national resources is our fisheries. Extremely unexploited. And so as an association, focus on that and sort of drive that. But obviously, we would educate and make the connections, if you will. Because when you think about the fish that even we harvest in the Bahamas, literally, Bahamians, we only really eat lobster, grouper, conch, snapper. Any other fish you bring to us on a large scale, most Bahamians don't even touch it. That's it. There's so much other fish that kind of roams these waters that we don't even touch. And not only that, nor do we have do we build the boats and the capacity to harvest them. Probably the most successful international commercial fishermen are the Bahamians out of Spanish wells that supply most or all of the lobsters to red lobster and probably some other fish, who knows, right? But we haven't done that. And I think to drive that, it really now sits with the government as far as how do they incentivize it. And I think it's very important, in my opinion, that this industry at that large scale be reserved 100% for Bahamians. But what it will take is that significant investment. So when you talk about now investing in a commercial fishing fleet, when you talk about now is employing those techniques that people use around the world for big, large-scale commercial fishing, that takes a significant amount of investment and know-how. And 9 times out of 10, if you want to do it right, you're going to have to import the talent initially and try to grow the talent, if you will, as well, locally, to really have Bahamians dominate that industry. But again, that's a question for the policymakers and the government as to how you make that happen. But in my mind, it's very underdeveloped, it's very unexploited, and it literally could mean hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues for the Bahamas. But it's not something that we have sat down, in my opinion, and really think about how do we fully exploit it. And I think China, Africa, and Europe, because again, we're in the warm waters of the Caribbean. If you look at the Bahamas on a global map, we have the most beautiful, pristine waters. Most of the fish, in my opinion, that actually lives in the Gulf and the Caribbean, they probably spawn right here in the Bahamas. Okay, and so given the waters and how we're set up, but we let these fish just kind of go away and other people catch them. One can argue that maybe the poachers catch more fish commercially in the Bahamas than we do, because we haven't sat down and really thought about how do we commercialize this particular industry fully and have it dominated 100% by Bahamians.
Yeah, I want to push back just a little bit, and not in a combative way, but just because I want to explore this thoroughly before we move on. There's something in me that is objecting on a fundamental level to the statement that is up to the policymakers or that is up to the government. And here's why I say this year marks the 50th year of our independent self-governance, majority rule, us being responsible for policy making in our own country, and despite what seems to be obvious opportunity, there has been no move by any government or any, and this is the political review, so no political administration has seriously investigated or put any kind of action or energy behind commercializing and industrialization of our fisheries resources. So to me, what that says is that it's very clear that the government is not going to do it. And when an opportunity that big is just sitting there, and the government literally refuses to take advantage of that, isn't it then the responsibility of the private sector to step in and say, okay, clearly this resource isn't going to get exploited unless we do the hard work.
Yes, you're exactly right, Quincy. Here's the thing. Let me tell you what I was talking about in the context of the government. So you're exactly right, 100%. And let me explain it this way. And let me explain what I said initially was exactly right as well, because they both come together. So when you look at industries that are set up anywhere in the world, none of those, especially those that are meant for international trade, none of those happen or facilitated without government certain levels. And the levels, when you think about an industry now that's going to be used for international trade, that means on a scale level, you now have to establish regulatory frameworks within that country so that industry doesn't get exploited or the natural resources don't get exploited to the point where you're left with nothing in a few years, or to the point where you're allowing actors to come in from the outside and set up the industry in a way where Bahamians don't benefit. So government then comes into that. When you now talk about international trade, trade tariffs, trade agreements, all those things that work and make things work, When you talk about establishing trade relations with various countries, various products, government play a role in that as well. That's all important. When you now talk about getting involved in the international market, especially with fisheries, now you're talking about how do you deal with this from a World Trade Organization's perspective. We talk about the volumes we're talking about. Governments are involved in that as well. So I'm looking at government from a facilitation standpoint, laying the groundwork, laying the rules, making sure that those trade relationships in place. Now we say, okay, if we're doing fisheries, who do we think is going to be our largest market? Is it going to be North America? Is it going to be Europe? Is it going to be China? Okay, great. Now we got to negotiate trade agreements. Well, those are happening bilaterally with governments. So that's where government gets involved in. Now it comes to the entrepreneur. Let's say I'm an entrepreneur and for whatever reason I've got $100 million to spend in fisheries. There is no way an entrepreneur who is thinking about risk mitigation is going to put that amount of money at risk when a regulatory regime is not in place for that particular industry, when trade relations aren't in place for that particular industry, when I know that if I try to bring my goods to market, somebody's not going to use some WTO dock spoiling because of some trade agreement that wasn't quite negotiated right. And so when you look at growing something on that large of a scale, you're now talking about risk mitigation. And policymakers, government, trade relationships, regulatory frameworks are the role of government, and they have to be in place in order to me to make sure that I'm not putting my money at risk unnecessarily. So that's what I talk about role of governments to play. So now when you talk about growing countries, and smart countries do this all the time, they talk about, okay, what natural resources do I have that's big enough for me to trade? And now let's get into the trade business. And that's where those bilateral trade agreements go into place because they have to set that framework so that when the entrepreneurs come behind them, there's risk mitigation already in place. And I know that at the end of the day, if something goes wrong, my government's going to protect me. And this goes back to what we said earlier about protecting the interest of the country or protecting the interest of its citizens. This is how governments work on an international bilateral trade relationship perspective. And so if you don't see yourself playing that game in that way, then you don't really negotiate that. Or if somebody in the Bahamas doesn't believe that we even have the volumes of fisheries to make this happen, then governments aren't going to do that. But if they believe that, and they believe that that can now expand their tax base and their level of influence in the world, then people then begin negotiating, okay? Because this country is only as strong as the wealth and the tax base that it builds. If you don't allow your citizens to be wealthy and give them opportunities to do that, if you don't, and that enhance and expands your tax base, then your growth as a country, your influence as a country diminishes. So if people don't see themselves politically as being in that arena, then nothing ever happens. And so as an entrepreneur, I'm never going to put that amount of money at risk. So that's the connection I was talking about.
Yeah, I get that. And that's fine. Not accept. I just want to be clear that I think that there is an opportunity there, and I wonder whether or not it's the kind of opportunity that the association would take the lead on. Only in the sense that what we're talking about is increasing trade relationships.
Right. No, here's the role I think the association will play, and I have no problem playing this role, is in going to China, speaking with individuals who import seafood in China, getting those connections, and then talking about the kinds of seafood they're interested in, and then seeing if there's a connection and a correlation between what that and what's available in Bahamian waters to exploit on a commercial basis. And then if those connections are there, and that opportunity is there, now we can say to the Bahamian business community and the government, say, hey, listen, China has a huge demand for X, this type of fish. We've seen it in the Bahamas that this type of fish is very unexploited. And if you look at maybe the fish runs, right off of the coast of Eleuthera or something, you can really snag them and get millions of pounds of this fish. It exists there. It's there. And nobody touches it. Okay? Maybe investment needs to be made because this is the economic opportunities there. We can facilitate those conversations. Now it becomes up to the policymaker to say, okay, great. What regulatory framework we have in place to protect the industry for the Bahamians and make sure that people don't overexploit the resources. And now what trade agreements do we need to negotiate to make sure that when our goods do leave the country to go to market, they're going to be sold, we're going to get the money coming in, and we're obviously going to increase our revenue base here and our tax base in the country. So we have no problem playing that matchmaker role. But again, there are other people that have to work with that as well. And obviously, this will be a part of our economic activity objective.
I'm not suggesting that I don't think anybody would think that it is the role of any association, friendship association, trade association, whatever, to play the role of the government and of the policymaker. It's just, I guess I'm just pushing to try to understand and get you to elaborate or explain to us the how you can open doors. As you talked about, for instance, you being a great door opener for startup businesses and MSMEs to be able to afford to stock up and launch their business, right? And then you're moving down to the next one with the tech. I guess I'll call it a tech hub. That's all I remember. But it's like, I guess I'm just saying is it your role to hunt for new business as well?
No, it's really our role to really understand the opportunities that are there, build those relationships, and then make those connections that's going to support our people. That's really our role there. And that's where, again, it's really sort of helping to spawn these cultural and economic ties, and then make sure that there's a spirit of friendship between the parties as we move the process forward. So really our role, as I see it, is to make those connections as best we can, and then we step away and allow people to do what they need to do. Allow the governments to do what they need to do, allow the entrepreneur to do what they need to do, and then make sure that we do what we can, that all the relationships are done in the spirit of friendship and fairness. That's really what I see our role is. I mean, we're not going to get deeply involved in the economic side or the political side. It's really making those connections, facilitating cultural understanding, because when you go to do business with people of different cultures, you've got to have some sensitivity as to how their culture is and how they think. I mean, we're Bahamians, we think a certain way. We view somebody, for instance, I mean, it's the funniest thing. People walk into a room, as far as Bahamians are concerned, if they don't say good morning to us, as far as we're concerned, they're the worst person in the world. They don't have any manners, right? And that's us. We're hung up on that as Bahamians. I mean, that's just the way we are. You've got to greet people. You've got to be nice. You got to be cordial. And if you don't do that, then as far as Bahamians are concerned, well, our relationship is downhill. So now you got to climb back up this hill. You got to show me you're a nice, decent, respectable person. So that's a cultural thing in terms of who we are. Whereas you got some other cultures, they're pushy. They don't really care. They just come and do whatever, and that's it. They expect that that's the way it is. So again, there's those cultural things that we try to help to bridge and understand in your relationships with China. That's a role that we're here to play.
Okay. It's 5 o'clock, Donovan. I don't know if I got time for one more question.
Yeah, just one more question, because I have another appointment, but one more question. It's great.
Okay, so the cultural exchanges, things like the study of the language and the history and these sorts of things, even the sports thing, the ping pong tournament that I see is coming up. These are all sort of initiatives that are sort of offered by China to Bahamians to come and participate, and that's the way it seems. So what is if you had a sort of a wish list for what you want the Chinese Bahamian relationship to look like, again, outside of the politics of it all, what do you think? What role do you think China and the Bahamas should play for each other? That's my last question.
Definitely great. So for me, I mean, ultimately for me, what I'd like to be able to do is see in the future where Bahamian businesses and entrepreneurs, if they wish, have a direct window and access into China for economic opportunities. So whether that be a product that we've designed and we are having it manufactured directly in China for shipment all over the world, in the Caribbean, if somebody wants to kind of dream that big, to me, I see us facilitating that direct opportunity. I also see us from a services standpoint, services sector, the Chinese tourists consuming more of the Bahamas, if you will, in terms of putting in their visiting plan. Now, in terms of how we got to get there, what's the easiest way for them to come here to the Bahamas and visit, I'd like to see that as well. Just kind of a sharing of the culture in terms of what we have to offer there as well from an economic standpoint. my understanding is that Bahamians have an opportunity to make their mind up about China and Chinese culture and really learn for themselves, sort of demystify this. And so for me, people say it all the time. I mean, it's always good if you think about a place is that you go visit yourself, or you at least meet the people and have a chance to talk to people. And so to me, it's all about trying to create those ties where there are opportunities for those things to happen. So there's a level of cultural understanding about a particular person or a country, before various thoughts are formed around that. And so some people don't always get the opportunity to do that or to see that firsthand. But if we can somehow facilitate that, then that's great. I mean, the advantage that we have, obviously, being close to the U.S. is that we hop on a plane and go there. All of us who go to college, most of us are educated there. We shop there. Some of us had an opportunity to work there. So we know that very, very clearly, and we understand it completely. When you talk about other cultures and countries of the world, it's one of those things where you want to be able to experience those things as well firsthand, as well as best you can. And in those cases where you can't for China, then we hope we facilitate those connections as best we can.
All right. Thank you very much for your time. And when is the trade mission again?
We have the trade mission coming up October 19th to the 28th. Those are the travel dates. On our website coming soon this week will be a sign-up form for individuals who are interested. So you can go to www.bcfa242.com, and I'm sorry, .org. And so you can have the ability to sign up and indicate your interest in the trade mission. We will have additional information coming. We're limiting to 50 people total. Obviously, persons who are members of the association will get first preference. So the individual membership is $100 per year. The company membership is $500 per year. And if you registered as a company, we will allow you 4 persons on the trade mission with you. But we're limiting the group to 50 persons maximum.
Mm-hmm. All right, awesome. That's www.bcfa242.org. It's got a good bit of information there. Donovan Moxie, president of the Bahamas China Friendship Association. Thank you for your time and energy. We really appreciate your time here on the Political Review, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Parker. Thank you for the time. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Folks, we're going to take a short break, and you are tuned in to the Political Review here on Guardian Talk Radio 96.9 FM. That's frequency modulation for you nerds like me. It's 5 minutes after 5, and we'll be right back.
When faced with an illness like cancer, we band together, and we at Cleveland Clinic in Florida have your back. From advanced cancer treatments to extra safety measures at all of our locations, we're with you on this journey for every infusion and follow-up, for every step of the way, for every care in the world. Cleveland Clinic in Florida. Get the care you need when and where you need it. To learn more or connect with a local representative, visit clevelandclinic.org/Caribbean.
Are you dreaming of the perfect summer getaway? Apply for a debt consolidation or personal loan to win an airline ticket to Paris, Miami, or New York. Win up to $2,500 in cash and more. For details, call 356-7764 for Nassau, 602-6811 for Freeport, 820.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Parents, it's that sweet time of year again.
What are you talking about? It ain't Christmas yet.
The kids are going back to school, so pick up your copy of the Nassau Guardian's Back to School Supplement, because
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
put your students in the latest styles at the lowest prices, because summer break is almost over, and our Back to School Supplement is filled with brand name back to school supplies at discounted prices, store locations, hours, and contact details.
It's the happiest season of all.
Advertisers, call the Nassau Guardian today at 302-2300, or call your account executive to get in on the 2-for-1 insertion deal. If it's uniforms, shoes, books, backpacks, calculators, art supplies, laptops, tablets, or whatever is on your back-to-school supply list, your ad should be in the Nassau Guardian's Back to School Summit.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Guardian Talk Radio's The Political Review with Quincy Parker. That's me. Hi there. Happy Sunday afternoon. I hope you're well. It is 8 minutes after 5 p.m. And today we are talking about China. Spent a few minutes with Dr. Donovan Moxey, who's the president of the Bahamas China Friendship Association, talking about the trade mission that that association has coming up in October 19th through the 24th, I think he said, and also discussing the role of such associations in trying to both improve and cement bilateral relations. It's a soft power thing, which is an incredibly important source of both diplomatic and economic influence. Soft power is something that I think perhaps we in a place like the Bahamas, we have no army. We do not project hard power out into the world, but we have significant opportunity to exercise soft power, which is the ability to co-opt rather than coerce. It's about being able to persuade people to take a certain course of action rather than threaten them and force them to accede to your desires or to your whims, right? Soft power is it's how you shape the preferences of other people through appeal and attraction, and it's incredibly persuasive, effective when it's employed properly. And we in the Bahamas have such an opportunity to use soft power to our benefit through things like these friendship associations. And sometimes I think that we miss the forest for the trees. But in any event, thinking about thinking about the People's Republic of China, it's a very, and listening to the conversations that we have, not just in the Bahamas, but around the region, about the Caribbean, there's this sense, as I mentioned to Donovan, this sense that we feel like they like quote unquote they are trying to quote unquote take over, and or they're trying to do something insidious in some way. And I want to really underline that and force us, if I can, to really look at that and see, see the way that that influences our conversation and our thinking, and possibly even our planning and policy making. Because keep in mind, politics is reflective of community, because the people who go into politics come out of our community. Their thinking is shaped by the same things that shape our thinking. Their views are our views because they are us. I mean, we all talk about it when we make the joke that, today you could be a teacher or a trade unionist or a doctor or an accountant, but tomorrow you could be the Minister of National Security, and you're expected, or you believe that you're expected to become a policy expert in national security overnight, literally overnight. Now, of course, that's not reality. We should not expect you anything about national security overnight, because we have a whole civil service apparatus for that. But that is what reality is, regardless of whether it makes sense. And that's the point. The point is, we have to deal with the reality that is, not with the reality that we think should be, right? And in this instance, I wonder if we are getting the most out of our relationship with China as a country based on these very prejudiced views that Bahamians seem to have. You can give us a call, of course, 323-6232, 325-4316, or 325-4259. As always, I love to take your text messages. You can text me at 422-4796. That's 422-4796. Sorry. So back to the research that I did this week. The People's Republic of China has, as I say, engaged in the Caribbean very directly since maybe the late to middle 1990s. I think it started to really ramp up. I'm talking about from my own memory. And then when you think about it, well, the research shows very clearly that that China's engagement in the Caribbean is focused largely on investments to begin with, and those investments have mostly been in infrastructure and developing trade relationships. One of China's very big sort of investment, both domestic and foreign investment initiatives, is something called the Belt and Road Initiative. Folks are familiar with that if they've been, paying attention to what China is doing out in the world. And 10 Caribbean countries had signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative as of 2022. Cuba, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Barbados, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Suriname. and that is there's very clearly, for our intended purpose, an absence from that list, isn't there? And now let's look at China's trade and economic investment in the Caribbean. And while the region's trade with China has grown at a slower pace than overall trade with the region, it increased from 1 billion in 2002 to 8 billion in 2019, with an estimated 6.1 billion in Chinese exports and 1.9 billion imports from the region into China. So that is a significant increase in trade over the course of a relatively short time. It's less than 20 years. And China is a major trading partner of Cuba. And I think Cuba would be a great, China and Cuba would be a great case study. Chinese businesses are involved in Cuba's telecommunications, tourism, mining, and energy sectors. Cuba is highly dependent on China, and ongoing economic challenges resulted in the restructuring of an estimated $4 billion in Chinese debt in 2011 and then again in 2015. So perhaps the question of Chinese-Cuban relationships, or relations, excuse me, is much more pragmatic and practical than it is philosophical. Maybe China is not, maybe Cuba is not quite as communist as it may seem. Maybe they just too dependent on that Chinese money, right? It's a possibility. Who knows? In any event, China's invested over $10 billion, mainly in 6 Caribbean countries between 2005 and 2022, focusing on tourism, transportation, extractive metals, agriculture, and the energy sector. And those 6 countries are Jamaica, which saw $3.16 billion in investments in that time frame. Guyana, which saw $3.01 billion. Trinidad and Tobago with $2.28 billion. Antigua and Barbuda with $1 billion. Cuba with $740 million. And the Bahamas with $350 million. So it's very clear that there's it's a deliberate move by China to invest in our region. And this next clip will show us, we'll hear in this next clip sort of a response to, or at least the beginning of a response to that investment in the region. And it'll help us, I think, sort of frame how we perceive Caribbean-Chinese relations, or at least it'll highlight some interesting points of view. So this is a report from CBS News, and I think that Chris, if you could let it rip now for us.
What the Chinese are doing in the air is nothing compared to their massive economic and political efforts on the ground in the Caribbean, Central and South America. And where's the United States?
For the most part, the U.S. has not spent great amounts of money in Latin America.
For years.
They have very high levels of investment just about in every country. from Venezuela to Brazil to Argentina to Bolivia to Chile.
The Chinese government and closely aligned military affiliates have spent billions in our region granting loans and building political alliances. Let's look right next door to the Bahamas. Ever since the Bahamas' recognition of the One China policy, Chinese bankers and construction companies have been loaning money to the Bahamas for infrastructure programs, including gambling casinos and resorts. There was a $30 million gift to build a national stadium, a $3 billion loan to upgrade the Freeport Megaport, the port now managed by the Chinese, $40 million to build a port in Abaco, and the $3 billion Bahamar Resort. And speaking of ports and supply chain management,
they've been administering the Panama Canal for a long time now.
And here's just a taste of Chinese investment and involvement across the region. Since 2005, $4.1 billion in Mexico, annual trade with Mexico, $100 billion. The Dominican Republic, $3.1 billion in loans and $600 million to improve infrastructure. Jamaica, $3.16 billion in loans and grants. And Cuba, a recent donation of $100 million and often restructuring of debt. China is Cuba's largest trade partner, second only to Venezuela.
They're making decisions on 100-year projections.
Chinese aggressively seeking raw materials, minerals to fuel their economy that has to sustain a population of 1.5 billion.
They essentially control the lithium triangle, Bolivia and Argentina.
Many of the countries in our region depend heavily on Chinese communications infrastructure, especially cell phone and internet technology. The Chinese have filled a vacuum neglected by the United States and in the process have gained immense communist-based political and economic leverage in the region that surrounds South Florida. I'm Hank Tester, CBS 4 News.
So you can tell as you listen to that, that there is a sense of, there is definite suspicion in the U.S. at the very least about the Chinese involvement in the region. And we have a caller joining us now. Caller, thank you very much for holding. You are live on the Political Review. Are you suspicious of the Chinese as well?
Good afternoon, Quincy Parker. How you doing, man?
I am well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, this is Velvet there.
Oh, hey, man. You all right today?
Yeah, man. Listen, I don't trust the Chinese. No further I can see them. Nowhere past my nose. See what you gotta understand with China, with the Chinese. The Chinese is ain't nobody else but that 1.7 billion people, what they get over there and their own self. So to throw out a couple dollars here and to throw out a couple dollars there, build a substandard stadium, put their own workers on it so that money don't stay here. A lot of that money don't stay here and go back. And all them kind of things, what they doing was only for one reason only, Quincy. And I know you know that. And that's for leverage at the table at the United Nations. That's what they doing that for. It's for votes. You see? Anything with the Chinese could put forward at the United Nations, they're looking for all of these people they spending this money on to side with them for votes at the United Nations. Thanks for taking my call.
But caller, before you go, just to ask a question that to me seems obvious, is there anything wrong with them doing that? I guess he already left. Yeah, I don't disagree with the caller. I think that is absolutely what they do. And I just finished talking about soft power. That is precisely what soft power is all about. It is about bringing others into your camp, onto your side, into your friend column, so that when you have an agenda to pursue, you have people who are happy to join you to pursue that agenda. So I don't know that I mean, the caller framed it as if that was a sinister agenda that China has, but we do the same exact thing. So we have another caller on the line. You're live on Guardian Talk Radio. Welcome to the Political Review.
Good afternoon, Quincy. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. And yourself?
Well, Quincy, let's do some contrast. Look at when the Vice President of the United States came to the Bahamas, and the offer she made to the entire Caribbean was how much again?
I can't remember.
What she offered the entire Caribbean in terms of funding for?
Yeah, call it. I can't remember. You got to tell me.
$100 million, maybe.
I think it was. Yeah.
When we look at what they left in Afghanistan, well over $7 billion worth of equipment. So if you compare that to what China is doing for the Caribbean, people would say, well, China is doing far more. But I would kind of be hesitant to say to trust China, because like anyone would do, it's in their best interest to try and leverage whatever power they can. But like you said before, the United States has been doing that for decades, so I don't see no difference.
Yeah.
The only problem I have is what is the Bahamas going to do to leverage their own to try and create some leverage for themselves rather than on their knees with their hands out. That's the problem I have right now.
This is the question indeed. You're right. It was just over $100 million, including $98 million in new funding for climate change, energy, food security.
Yeah, I thought it was a joke.
Huh?
I thought that was a joke.
I mean, this is what I'm saying, right? What I said to Donovan Moxie was that the hundreds of millions of dollars that China has invested in the Bahamas, even for a small Chinese state, that's a rounding error. That money is so small, that's an accounting mistake. Right. So for a country with an economy the size of the United States to offer a region with the dozens of millions of people who live in it, less to buy coffee for everybody who works in one of the small U.S. state capitals, it is almost an insult. But it tells you how little the U.S. values and rates the Caribbean.
Correct. That's the main point there.
We could give you this little measly $100 million and you'll be grateful. And listen, the Caribbean will be grateful because $100 million we don't have is $100 million we don't have. But the reality is,
and that's why I mentioned us on our knees with our hands out, rather than looking at the value that we actually have and can leverage what we actually have that they need to our benefit. But we're not doing that.
But Carla, I don't think we culturally, and I usually spank the politicians for this, but I wanna be fair today and say that it isn't just the politicians, because as I was saying, politicians come from the community. We don't import politicians, right? Our politicians grow up with us. They go to the same school and church we go to, and then we vote for them. And then tomorrow we ask them to make policy.
Before I go, I think you need to push back on that a bit. Because it appears that every time, because I've heard on numerous radio hosts, whenever there's some nefarious act happened by a politician or some policy that's pushed forward that the public doesn't want, people always say that, well, these politicians came from us. Well, I say that the politicians act based on their party, not on what the public actually wants, where they push agendas that the public definitely doesn't want. So I wouldn't say they are from us, but I'll say, but they are from us. But I'm saying their policies is definitely not for the public or from the public.
Yeah, and I would agree with that to the extent that they certainly have not done or said. Tell me if I'm wrong, caller. I say that both the Free National Movement and the Progressive Liberal Party should be ashamed that after 50 years of independent self-rule, the country with the third largest fisheries resources in the region does not have an industrial fishing sector.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying to you?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
There is more money in our fisheries sector than our entire GDP. But we do not fish it. We just let folks go out and, they catch a little bit for the lobster season, and then you got your little grouper season, you got your little conch season. But the amount of money that we could be making from our fisheries is unfathomable. And it's unfathomable because they won't even do any research. They won't even investigate it.
Because they still have the fishing village mindset. But I have to go on that one.
I don't disagree with that, caller. Thank you very much. But I mean, the caller, fishing village mindset is, he preached a sermon with that. Okay. So what I'm doing as part of the conversation too, are us to consider some of China's engagement in our region and trying to sort of underline why American interests might have concerns, especially when you consider the relative value of the investments over the years and what those relative, you put your money where your mouth is and in international relations, that is as true as it is in interpersonal relations. What you value, you fund. And as much as I'm talking about soft power today, I'm also talking about putting your money where your mouth is. And have we seen, I mean, let me not ask that question, but you'll understand my point. In terms of investment in the Caribbean energy sector, China's investment in Caribbean energy from 2005 to 2020, China's investments in energy and infrastructure throughout the Caribbean reached more than $7 billion. $7 billion. So China's state-owned enterprise, the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, has a 25% stake in Stabroek Block 25, an offshore crude oil deposit projected to produce upwards of 4 million barrels per day by 2025. ExxonMobil holds 45%, Guyana's 30% stake. That's in Guyana. In 2011, China's Sovereign Wealth Fund acquired a 10% interest in Trinidad and Tobago-based Atlantic LNG, which is one of the world's largest natural gas producers. In 2019, a subsidiary of the Chinese national oil company, the CNPC, which stands for China National Petroleum Company, Great Wall Drilling, which is the subsidiary, began drilling off Cuba's coast for oil as part of a joint venture with Cuba's state-owned firm, Cuba Petroleum Company. In 2017, Jamaica's Alpart Alumina Refinery was purchased by Chinese state-owned enterprise Jiquan Iron and Steel Company for about $300 million. And the China National Corporation for Exploration and Development of Oil and Gas has, a 30% stake in the consortium developing Stabroek block. I mentioned that earlier. So in terms of the Caribbean infrastructure, some of the signature Chinese projects include, first and foremost, in my view, Hutchison Port Holdings, which owns and operates the Freeport Container Port in our lovely Commonwealth of the Bahamas. More than a bit in Jamaica, and Chinese ownership through China Merchant Port Holdings of the Port of Kingston, Jamaica. The China Harbor Engineering Company, as of November of last year, was still constructing a port in La Brea to increase the exportation of gas from Trinidad and Tobago. Projects in Guyana include a $256 million contract to the People's Republic of China to build a lengthy and strategically important bridge over the Demerara River. Hundreds of millions of dollars for road work, including a $200 million highway from Skinard to Parika. $200 million upgrade to the road from Annandale to Mahaica, and improvements to road segments in the capital city of Georgetown. In 2020, the government of Suriname signed an infrastructure corporation agreement for 2 photovoltaic microgrid projects with the China Power Construction Corporation. That's a solar microgrid. Can we say hello, Ragged Island? In 2017, the principal government of Gansu signed a framework agreement with the Jamaican government to invest up to $6 billion in an industrial park. That same year, that's $384 million loan from the China Import-Export Bank to build a road network on the island to complement a $730 million highway built earlier in 2017 in return for a 5-year concession to the Chinese construction company that included land alongside the highway to be used for development. So, as we go to this next break, I just want you to consider who's spending money in the region and where. Sorry about that, Chris. Go ahead. Let's go ahead and take that break, Chris. We'll be right back here on the Political Review.
A lot of folks are wondering, what is the Agrarian Awards? It's an award show to celebrate the people who produce the food that feeds the country. So September 16th, we're giving out trophies and money to young farmers, backyard farmers, sheep runners, goat herders, pea pickers, onion planters, basically everyone. But we couldn't fit all that on the invite, so we put Agrarian Awards instead. Go to adobahamas.org to find out how to nominate your favorite agrarian. The Agrarian Awards, September 16th.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
This is Guardian Radio, your station for up-to-the-minute news, intelligent, interactive, and engaging conversation. 96.9 FM.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Political Review. You are tuned in to 96.9 FM. It is 43 minutes past 5 o'clock. I'm your host, Quincy Parker, and it's been an interesting conversation today. First, with regard to the Bahamas-China Friendship Association, and second, we've been talking about how China has conducted its affairs in the region and why. And when you think about China's soft power in the Caribbean, you think about things like well, I'll tell you what, before we talk more directly about soft power, I don't want to run out of time. So Chris, if you could play that second clip for me. This folks is a report done by a Jamaican media agency, kind of considering the impact of Chinese investment in the Caribbean. So, Chris, if you could go ahead and let that roll.
Investment in infrastructures includes Hutchinson Port Holdings in the Bahamas, China Merchant Kingston, Jamaica, the current construction of a port in La Brea to facilitate gas exports from Trinidad and Tobago, the construction of a bridge over the Demerara River in Guyana, and several highway projects, as well as the construction of an industrial park in Jamaica. As far as the energy sector goes, a subsidiary of Chinese national oil company CNPC, Great Wall Drilling, began drilling oil off the coast of Cuba in 2019. In 2017, Jamaica's Alpart Alumina Refinery was purchased by Juquan Iron and Steel Company, and in 2011, China acquired a 10% interest in Trinidad and Tobago-based Atlantic LNG, one of the world's largest natural gas producers. At the same time, the government of China published two papers, one in 2008 and the second in 2016, named China's Policy Paper on Latin America and the Caribbean, outlining the country's policy for the region and highlighting the common goal of strengthening cooperation through equality and mutual benefits in several key areas. The China Caribbean Press Center was established in 2018, and the country has dedicated a significant level of attention to Caribbean security engagement, actively carrying out military exchanges and cooperation with countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Military and police equipment are frequently donated by China, especially to Cuba, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. The Confucius Institute, a non-profit organization aiming to promote the Chinese language and culture, support Chinese teaching internationally, and facilitate cultural exchanges, established schools in Cuba, Jamaica, Guyana, the Bahamas, Suriname, Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, and Barbados. What is the explanation for all of these investments, keen interest, and donations to our Caribbean region? Trade has become an increasingly important part of China's economy, and it has been seen as a significant tool for economic modernization. According to World Bank data for 2020 and 2021, China's trade surplus for both goods and services is constantly growing, as well as the country's overall trade balance. Locally, China gains uncountable benefits from these investments. An interesting example is the North-South Highway in Jamaica. Started in 1999 by a French contractor who had to be interrupted due to financial difficulties. The project was taken over by Chinese contractors in 2009. Peculiar agreements were made between the Chinese and the Jamaican governments, and the project was assigned to CHEC, China Harbour Engineering Company Limited, while China Development Bank loaned $700 million for its completion. To repay the loan, Jamaica transferred 500 hectares of land adjacent to the highway. The CHEC has agreed to build hotels, which will boost Jamaica's economy and create revenue for China. Jamaica's total debt to China is this way extremely low, and the local labor force has been employed in Chinese projects throughout the Caribbean. It's basically seen as a win-win. What are the reactions of the Caribbean people toward these Chinese investments? The reactions are mixed. A good part of the population understands the need for the money and resources, which would not be readily available if we hadn't obtained the help of such economically powerful country. The majority of business-minded people in the Caribbean, including business owners, investors, and the government, clearly see that the bigger picture is bright and that all these investments will serve our countries for the future and not just in the immediate present. Once loans are repaid and debts are cleared, countries such as Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Guyana are left with enormous projects that boost our economy, provide job opportunities to our people, and generate income. On the other hand, a negative attitude towards China and its people is not so uncommon amongst Caribbean people. Some people are suspicious because of China's concerning environmental record and involvement in the COVID-19 pandemic. Others are worried that while it's good to build and invest in our countries, China brings a lot of workers from their country and does not provide high-quality jobs to locals. Circling back to the example of Jamaica's North-South Highway, there have been records of several hostilities towards this project from the Jamaican people. It boosts the economy, provides a faster and safer way of moving around, and makes it possible to trade and commute in a reliable and more convenient way. It also blocked out towns and communities which used to thrive around the areas now occupied by the highway, which are slowly dying because they are now impossible to reach. The total area was in a protected area, and which took a lot of pushback for the government to agree that it should not break the law and impact the environment. Barbados, which recently renounced the Queen and took some financing from China, was immediately accused of being a communist country, generating a bit of drama in the region. Generally speaking, countries such as Jamaica have a bit of a negative attitude towards Asian populations, and this became very clear in the last decades, with the number of Chinese people growing exponentially in the country as a direct or indirect result of all these investments from the Chinese government. It is not a feeling just confined to the Caribbean, however. China operates an authoritarian government with values that are quite far from liberal democracies. Concerns around their funding and investments are quite natural and shared on a global scale. China has been accused of setting debt and data traps across the world by the head of MI6, Richard Moore. But the evidence is very poor and quite foggy. The anti-China rhetoric that has been propagating from the West in the past years loses terrain when we see that not all projects coming from China are so bad or negatively affect our Caribbean countries. On the other hand, it is believed that it is not too late for the United States of America to arrest the deepening China-Caribbean engagement that is so feared on a local and global scale alike, and that could result in policies admittedly going against the Western world strategies and interests. The USA have devoted very little time and money to the Caribbean region, and therefore a radical change will become necessary if they want to step into the game.
The last two sentences of that report, I think, sum up what we're really talking about here. I cannot help but think there's a level of racism involved. And I don't mean personal racism. I'm not saying that any particular American is racist or not. What I'm saying is, I think that there is a view of the Caribbean that is held by the traditional Washington establishment that is based on racist views, and that there is an inability to see what it is that is attractive about Chinese investment. There is a sense that I get that American interests believe that just because they are American, they are by divine right almost to be admired and to be courted and sought after. And the reality is, when you look at what was said by Kamala Harris when she was here a couple of weeks ago. I mean, I'm a big Kamala Harris fan for, obvious reasons, right? But a couple of $1 million here and there for climate change assistance. I won't call it a joke because it's not a joke. Any money in the pot is better than no money in the pot. But in terms of sex appeal, and sex appeal is important in soft power. I think the American interests have to realize that billion is sexier than million, and it doesn't matter who you are when your entry into the game is $1 billion versus $1 million. Then you got a lot to say. And the self-interest of a country like the Bahamas, which would trade with China, which would accept investment from China, which would do all of these things that concern our major trading partner and the source of 80% of our tourists, has to be seen in the context of accepting a reality that is. And that reality is money talks and BS walks. It's just that simple. And while we in this community want to continue to indulge and engage in the kind of racism that we lament when it is practiced on us, as demonstrated amply in this conversation a couple of times today, then we will continue to be a part of the conversation by virtue of our vote at the UN, and not a part of the conversation because we are viewed as an equal partner by any of those people who are in the conversation, who are at the table. That's my view. I will take this last call, and thank you very much for holding. You are live on the Political Review. You might just get the last word, so you better make it a good one.
Yeah, Quincy, listen. China don't need nothing from nobody. Several years ago, China was posting $3 trillion in reserves. $3 trillion. It probably almost double that now. So with that kind of money in just reserves, you guys understand China, China does oppress their own citizens. China got them people leading in technology, but China needs pay them people like $2 a day, man. You understand? So they got that kind of money to do that kind of thing. And like the fellas say, or y'all said, China is a communist country. China ain't get no interest in other than their own interest. And America, of course, Donald Trump summed it up nicely a couple of years ago when he was president. He said, man, them people in them asshole countries, America don't have no real interest in the Caribbean. That's why they ain't checking. And what they could take out of Haiti, whatever, they didn't drum up all that out of Haiti. They got Guantanamo Bay keeping the Cubans at bay. You understand? So they really interested in this side over here. So China trying to drumming up votes for themselves at the UN. You understand? They ain't the best place to brag or boast about when it comes to the way they speak. You understand? So they got that kind of money to do that, man, Quincy. Thanks for taking my call.
No problem, Kuala. And honestly, it's not about. I don't care how much money China got. That's not the point. At least not the point that I'm making. The point that I'm making and trying to discuss is the relative value of, or not even the relative value. Just I want an honest discussion and an honest conversation when it comes to Chinese involvement in the Bahamian economy. And I don't think there has been, honestly speaking. And that's going to be the last word for today. It was a great conversation, folks. Thank you very much for your calls and for listening, and for your WhatsApps. Next time, send the WhatsApp as a text so I can read it to everybody. Let's Talk Together live in English is up next with Lady T. Christoph, thank you for a great job. I appreciate you.